Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I just want to give you a quick rundown for those of you who don't know who Crockers are. Just a quick rundown of who we are. We're the largest body corporate in New Zealand. We have over 900 body corporates throughout the country, which is 18,500 units which we have the body corporate managements for. We're also the largest one property office for property management in New Zealand with over 3,500 residential properties under our management, and we have a valuations team and a realty sales team. We've also recently set up a property power company, so if you're looking for cheap power, contact Property Power. Just so you know who I am, I've worked as a property manager for the last 9 years for Crockers. I used to run the city team, which did mainly apartments and unit title properties. So when it comes to unit title and Residential Tenancies Act, there's very little that I probably would like to say that I don't know. Yeah. So today I'm going to talk to you a couple of things, mainly about how to get more money out of your property. A couple of things about the Unit Titles Act, Residential Tenancies Act, just a few changes which we've had. A few boring things about health and safety, but unfortunately it's big in the news at the moment. And then we'll head into a couple of other parts about insurance. So, first things first, I'm sure everyone wants to know how to get more money out of their property. So I'm just going to run you through a scenario. Just presume you've got your property already, it's tenanted, your tenant's vacated. One of the biggest things to make money is you need rent. Okay? So how do you set the rent? And this is one thing which a lot of private landlords always get wrong. Do you just put it up by a $10, $20 increase on what the previous tenant was paying? I sure as heck hope not. You need to do research. Okay? You need to understand your property is a business. You don't make decisions without doing research in business. It's exactly the same for your rental property. So where do you go to do your research? Most people will pop off to Trade Me. It's a good start, particularly if your property's in Auckland. If you have a property down in Palmerston, probably not so useful. When Trade Me put their prices up, a lot of companies stopped using Trade Me. A lot of companies now tend to use realestate.co.nz. So you need to use both of these. However, I'll point out the figures that you see on Trade Me and realestate.co.nz aren't actual the rental prices. They're not the prices which your properties are rented for. They're the advertised price. Now, if you've got people out there like myself, tenant gives us 3 weeks' notice, I'll figure out what the market rent is, then I'll check $30, $40, even $50 on top of it for the first week. The reason I do that is, even though a lot of our tenants actually know what the market rents are, you'll always be surprised by the odd person who comes along and pay a whopping rent for something. Doesn't happen always, but if you do it for the first week, then make sure after week 2 you drop it down, you make sure you get the right market rent, and you'll be guaranteed you'll have yourself a tenant before the property comes vacant. So, Trade Me, realestate.co.nz, they're advertised figures. People will negotiate, not always the actual rents, what people rent for. So where do you go to find out what the actual rents are? Tenancy Services. Tenancy Services have a great website. You put into where the suburb is or the town where you've got your property, and it'll come up with the lower, medium and upper quartile range for the rents in that area. And it'll even tell you how many bonds, it's often bonds, how many bonds have been lodged in that area as well. So you know, might be 100, so you're fairly sure those figures are good if it's 100. If it's say 5 or 6, well, you have one high rent or one very low rent, it can sort of skew the figures a little bit. Something else you need to be very careful about with Tenancy Services though is Tenancy Services also includes Housing New Zealand properties. Now Housing New Zealand, I know they say they charge market rents, but I can guarantee you that their market rents are about 2 years behind our market rents. So, this is a bit of a plug for Crockers now. Where do you go? You go to the Auckland rental prices. Crockers puts us in the Herald every month. We have it free on our website. What's the difference between the data from us and the data from Tenancy Services? Very simple. We take out all the Housing New Zealand, all the social properties. So all of the rental prices on our website are usually slightly higher than the ones on Tenancy Services, purely because it's private investors, and private investors usually get a higher rental return. Okay. So, you've figured out the rent for your property, you've advertised it, you've got your tenant. What else do you need to know? 2, February. The month of February is really important for investors. The month of February is the month of the year when the rents are the highest. Now, it's not just because students come back into the market. If your property is a student type property or not, it doesn't really matter. What happens is you have a lot more people coming into the market taking a certain percentage of the properties out of the market, which pushes people who would normally look here a bit further up. You can usually get $20, $30 more a week in rent in February than you can in June or July. So I would encourage all property investors, when you can, it's not always possible, but when you can, get your properties going from February to February. Only sign 12 months leases. Try to get the tenants going from moving in February and then moving out in February the year following. Come February, if your tenant's not prepared to sign for another fixed 12 months, that's fine. That's their choice. They can move out. But you're better to have your property vacant then than you are in December or in January or July. The other thing is, if your tenant does decide to move out partway through the year, they change, that's fine. Put it back on them to find someone. You have a contract with them. So they have to find someone else to take over the end of their contract. Put the cost back on them, make sure they do the work for you. Okay. So, once you've got your property tenanted, what do you need to do? Next, you need to make sure you maintain it. I know people don't like spending money, but the reality is, I'm not talking about just spending your money, I'm also talking about making a plan. Making for a plan for how you're going to look after your investment. These states here are from Tenancy Service and Real NZ. So I've chosen 6 areas of Auckland which have quite large rental stock. Avondale, Mount Wellington, Mangere Bridge, Mangere, Birkdale and Massey. Birkdale, I will point out, also includes Beach Haven, so the figures are a little bit skewed there. So we've got the lower, medium and upper quartile rental ranges for these areas. And as you can see, the per annum net difference between the lower and the upper rentals can vary from $9,000 down to $4,500. Average is around a $5,000 difference. If you have these are for 4-bedroom houses, by the way, sorry. If you have a 4-bedroom house which is 200 square metres and you need to replace the carpet, and your property is earning, take for example Avondale, $695 a week, the cost of replacing the carpet is exactly the same for your 4-bedroom, 200 square metre house as it is if it's earning $560 a week. Which one's going to have a bigger hit on your income? Ideally, you want to be trying to aim to get yourself up around that medium to upper quartile. How do you do that? Maintain the property. Maintain the property, get good tenants who will also look after the property. Make sure you've got a budget. Set aside some money. If not physically in an account, at least allow for it, that you are going to have slight maintenance costs. That would be on a yearly basis, but I'd also talking about a long-term plan. Unit title properties, they have what we call the sinking funds, which are now called the long-term maintenance plans. Individual owners should also have a long-term maintenance plan for their investment. This is a business. You want to make sure that you maintain the highest income for your business. The best way to do that is making sure that you allow for things in the future so that you can continue to keep that rent at an upper level. The cost of replacing a kitchen. To put out a new bench, a nice granite bench, about $4,000, have the cabinets taken away, repainted, put back, new basin, new tap, you're looking not more than $8,000, to be well under that in fact, depending on the kitchen. Okay? That'll make a huge difference to you being able to find a tenant next time round. It'll also make a huge difference to how people will treat your property. So the cost of maintenance doesn't have to be high. And I'm not saying just because you're trying to get your rent up in the upper quartile that you're going to put aside that $7,000 difference from the lower quartile. I'm just saying allow for a percentage of that. Because if your property's down the bottom, the cost of doing these repairs in 10 years' time, replacing carpets and everything, is exactly the same as the ones at the top. So at least make sure that you're getting as much rent as you can to reduce the cost on you. So your goal is always to remain in the medium to upper quartile for your investment property. This is just a little bit of note for those people who don't know. Tenancy Tribunal requires investment properties to be painted every 5 years. So if you have a lovely purple wall in your house or your apartment, not that purple's a nice colour for a wall, but the tenant decides to put a hole in the wall, if you haven't had that property painted, or that wall painted within the last 5 years, all the tenant needs to do is patch it up so you can have a nice big white patch in the middle. Okay? They don't have to paint that whole wall. So this all goes back to ongoing maintenance. If the tenant moves out, pop in there. If there's any marks on the walls, go through, just touch them up. Then you can go to tribunal and say, actually, when was it painted? The whole property might not have been painted, but you've touched it up. It was painted last time the tenant moved in, which might have been a year ago. Okay? But it does go back to the fact that if you maintain your property, the chances are you're not going to have tenants who are going to go and cause any damage to the property anyway. So, we've tenanted our property, we've got the tenants going February to February, we've got a maintenance in place, we've got the property looking good. What's next? Rent reviews. It's one of the things which I do find that private investors always lack in, being able to do good rent reviews. Even Housing New Zealand do yearly rent reviews. Okay? So if Housing New Zealand are doing yearly rent reviews, private investors must be doing 6-monthly rent reviews. Even if you have a tenant on a fixed 12-month tenancy agreement, it does not mean that you cannot do a rent review. You need to make sure that you have a rent increase clause in your contract. This is a clause we put in all of our contracts. The landlord hereby reserves the right to review the rent in accordance with the Residential Tenancies Act, which states that any increase shall be notified in writing not less than 60 days in advance and take effect not less than 180 days since the start of the tenancy. Sometimes we do have tenants who will try to negotiate that away and say, oh, I don't want that. I will never ever cross that clause out of a contract. I will never negotiate my owner's rights to actually review the rent and run their business as profitable as they can. If the tenant's not happy for it, that's fine, they can move on, okay? But it's important that it is in your contracts. Now, when do you go and do these rent reviews? I can tell you now, you don't do it in 6 months after the tenant's moved in. You do it 4 months after. You need to be checking the rents within 4 months of a tenant moving in. Why? Because it's 60 days notice before that rent increases. If you wait 6 months and you increase the rent by, say, $50, and you wait for 6 months to do it, it's another 60 days. That's $500, which you've lost out on. Now, I'm not saying that all rents are going to go up by $50, but if you do end up renting your property in the middle of winter, come summer, it probably will go up. And the way the Auckland property market has gone in the last 2 or 3 years, rents have been going up by $50, $60, $70. I'll also point out there is no limit to how much you can put a rent up, okay? The only limit is it must be within the market rent. You cannot have a tenant on a fixed term lease and suddenly put their rent up by $100 when the market was $100 less than what it is. Okay? So if you haven't done rent increases for the last 2 or 3 years and you decide, actually, look, I've got all this maintenance, I need to put some money aside, I want to actually get my tenant rents back up, you don't need to do $20 every 6 months. You can do a $100 rent increase. I do it. Yeah? It's not pleasant, but it is what you have to do. Reality is, when tenants have a look around, they'll see that other people are paying the same. So one of the things which we get when we tell people we need to do rent increases is excuses. Multitudes of excuses as to why we shouldn't be doing rent increases. The classic one is, I have good tenants and I don't want to scare them off. Well, I've got to be honest, I've been managing properties for 9 years. I've had excellent tenants for 9 years. And I can guarantee you that I haven't just started doing rent increases recently, I've been doing it for 9 years. I have not had a tenant move out because of a rent increase. When you put the rent up on a property, the first thing a tenant's going to do is bitch and complain. The second thing they're going to do is go on to Trade Me or realestate.co.nz and have a look at what everyone else is paying. If your rent's in line with the market, they're not going to move. They're not going to go pay for a moving company to move their stuff. They're not going to get the utilities reconnected in a new property. They're not going to come up with another 3 or 4 weeks bond to lodge at a new property before moving, just because the rent is $10, $20 or $30 more than what it was previously. Okay? The other excuse we often get is, my tenants look after the property and there's no maintenance. This one always scares me. Whenever I go into a property where the owner hasn't given a rent increase, and it's because, oh, the tenants are really good, they don't create any maintenance, I always know that I'm going to walk into a problem. The problem being is the tenants then start to get scared about contacting the owner, because they think if I contact the owner's going to start giving me a rent increase. And then you find out that the sink underneath the sink's been leaking, and suddenly the cupboards have become like wheat bix. Okay? You actually, all tenants are good, but I want my tenants to tell me about the maintenance. I want them to tell me if there's issues. It's my choice and the owner's choice to decide whether we actually repair or carry out the maintenance. Sometimes the requests aren't reasonable. Sometimes they are. But I would rather know than not know. So if by actually just not increasing the rent because the tenant's not telling about maintenance, I'd be very scared. When that tenant moves out in 10 years' time, you could be up for a huge cost of repairs, and the reality is you've been subsidising their rent for the last 10 years, and then you're getting hit at the end of it for that. So, I guess one of the reasons I'm here is to try to convince you that you all want property managers. So, why a property manager? Well, I can tell you right now, we're aware and trained in health and safety, which I'm about to get into, and you'll figure out why that's important. P-Labs, they're in the media at the moment. You need to know what you're doing when it comes to P-Labs, okay? P-Labs generally, at the moment, touch wood, haven't hit Auckland so bad as some of their provinces, okay? And also a lot of the Housing New Zealand properties. But it is going to become an issue, and you need to have a plan in place, okay? At the moment, a lot of the P-Labs aren't going to property, people who are doing P-Labs aren't going to property management companies because the checks are much more thorough than often with private landlords or Housing New Zealand, okay? We don't go by the gut feeling, we make sure we've got those checks in place. And that includes picking up the phone and calling employers, previous landlords. There's checks which property managers can do and have access to, which private landlords don't. Another thing, robust systems. You need to make sure that there's robust systems. That's why you want property managers, okay? The quality of inspections are really important, particularly for insurance. If something goes wrong with your property, the first thing an insurance company wants to see is the last 3 or 4 years worth of inspections. And they've got to be good quality. They can actually turn you down, irrespective of what the inspection was for. They can turn you down for that claim, just on the basis if you don't have them. Our company actually has people who go around and audit our property managers' inspections randomly the month after inspections. Not all of them, but randomly throughout the year they are done. That isn't because we don't trust our property managers, it's to make sure that we're maintaining the level which all our clients expect and that our clients are getting the right information. Because of course the inspection also tells you how to maintain the property to keep the rent high. The last one is discount maintenance services. I know if I call our plumbers, he'll come, I'll get the job done considerably cheaper than anyone if he does the same job for anyone else, because of the volume of work which we put through. Why else? We're trained in the real world application of a Residential Tenancies and Unit Titles Act. What does this mean? Well, both the acts are grey, black and white, but like all black and white books, there's grey areas. One of my favourites of the Residential Tenancies Act is reasonably clean and tidy. I can tell you what, my consideration of what reasonably clean and tidy is worlds apart to what my tenants is. But I know how to go to tribunal and make sure that I win those cases, okay? Things like the 5-year painting. I know how to go to tribunal and make sure that my owners are recompensated if there is damage in the properties. That is what property managers are able to do. Knowledge of the rental market. This is imperative. You've got to know the market. Crockers, about 2 or 3 years ago, made a business decision. We used to have an office in Botany. We used to have one in the city. We actually made a business decision to close those offices down and bring everyone down to our Manukau Road office. I know everyone likes to have offices near the area where their properties are and everything, but the reality was it wasn't working for us. What we found is we had investors who would have a property down South Auckland, they'd have another one out west. They like their property manager, they're wanting them to do the property management for it. But the property manager, if he's based down South Auckland, he doesn't know what the market is out west. He doesn't know where it is up north. He only knows what it is down there because that's what he's based at. So what we did is we brought all our property managers together. Now, we still have specialist areas, so those property managers are more often not in those areas of the city. But the reality is they can. If they do have owners who do want stuff managed in other areas, they can go. I can go to one of my colleagues and say, hey, look, I don't know the North Shore. I've got this property in Milford. Tenant's moving out. What do you think? What are the issues? Or, I've got a problem. I need a contractor out there. Who's the best contractor in that area to get to deal quickly? Knowing the knowledge of the market and actually having that knowledge, if you don't know it, at least having access to it is imperative. Financial statements, end of year reports. I can guarantee you we're cheaper than accountants. Not that I'm saying you don't need accountants, you obviously do. But we can make sure that the reports are through, they're clear, they're concise. You can turn up, you can give your accountant, here's the yearly statement reports, be much faster and I can imagine much cheaper than turn out with a shoebox full of receipts and Excel spreadsheets with rent arrears. Last one, oh not quite, no emotion attached to business transactions. This is imperative. One of the things we find with a lot of owners is that they do build relationships with tenants. Now it's okay to build a relationship with a tenant, but at the end of the day, this is a business for you. You can't just have your tenant, oh look, little Julie, she's She got sick last week, so she didn't get paid. Look, I'll pay you the rent next week. Oh, yeah, that's fine. And then next week runs around and, oh, look, my employer forgot to pay me. I'll pay it next week. If you've got that relationship, it becomes harder to chase them up. For us, it's a business decision. We work for the owner. It's a business. Look, we're sympathetic with tenants, but at the end of the day, we're there to make sure that the properties are run without any issues. Often owners will also have emotional attachments to the properties, and we need to point out that, look, this is the best way for you to earn a return on your property, and this is how the process to do it. Okay? Finally, how important is your time? This, I would say, is probably priceless. If you're at a soccer game with your child on a Saturday morning, parent going out to lunch with the family later on, and your tenant rings up and says the hot water cylinder's broken, or the oven doesn't work, are you prepared to give up your day to go fix that? I know I sure as heck aren't. That is probably the most important thing for why you would be a property manager. You don't need the stress for this. You know, property management fees are a tax deduction, so you're hardly paying for it. Supposedly. Yeah? Okay, moving on. Health and safety. So, why does health and safety affect you? It's a business. Health and safety covers businesses. If you own a rental property, you now own a business. So you now fall under the Health and Safety Act. I was talking to a banker the other day, and he said that they ran a health and safety conference last year and had almost no one turn up. Then in April this year, they got overbooked, and so much so they're thinking about running it again. Health and safety is going to become a very big issue, and it doesn't matter what industry, but even, you know, residential property management and residential investments, it is also going to be a very big issue for owners now. We usually follow Australia, generally speaking, when it comes to residential property investments. So Australia's had a very strict health and safety law, which New Zealand law is quite similar to, in place now for many years. This is a case which happened back in 2010, where basically an investor and property manager were fined 840,000 Australian dollars. To give you a bit of an idea of what the case was about, the tenant had a break-in at the property. They broke in the window at the back door, so the glazier came in, went through the front door, went down the back, repaired the back door pane, went back out and left the property. Now in Australia, all properties must have safety glass. Now it doesn't have to be retroactively installed, but you do have to have it. So if you have someone doing work on a property at any stage which is related to the glass, then it must be done. This didn't happen. The tenant came home late one night, seriously injured themselves, and they were taken to court. This has been since disputed, this amount. It was taken, I think, to another court, and I think it's been knocked down to about 670,000, 640,000. But I can tell you what, I sure as heck don't have $640,000 lying around. So you want to make sure that things have been done properly. Unfortunately, probably until someone gets caught, we're not really going to know how it's going to be run in New Zealand. But I can guarantee you do not want to be the first person to be caught. So, what do? Employ a professional property manager for starters. That takes the liability away from you, as long as you follow their advice. Number 2, ensure all your contractors are appropriately qualified. Using your mate George, who's a plumber, is fine, as long as you've seen that he's actually properly qualified and that his certification is up to date. If it's not, he does something wrong in the property, your tenant slips over, breaks a leg, then you could be held left holding the can. You need to make sure that they're appropriately qualified and those qualifications are still valid. You also need to make sure that they have indemnity insurance. Now, the indemnity insurance is important because you're the employer. You've employed someone to go to your business to carry out a repair. If that person makes a mistake and they don't have indemnity insurance, they can close down their business and set themselves up down the road and under a new name, and you're left to carry the can should there be any problems or fines or anything to be dished out. So you want to make sure that they've got indemnity insurance. So if the electrician goes through, check that he has indemnity insurance. Make sure that he can actually, that's your security. Act on defects and ensure health and safety issues are dealt with appropriately. If you have a deck, you know, previously I've known people to have decks and the wood on the deck will start getting a little bit rotten. So someone will go and get a nice big piece of plywood, slap it over the top of the deck. That's not going to cut the mustard anymore. If the other panels start getting rotten, that falls through, tenant gets injured, you knew about that, you are going to get pinged big time. So when you see issues which are health and safety issues, it's not a choice to actually ignore it anymore. And I will point out, health and safety issues is going to become mould. You know, you can't have properties which have black ceilings from mould anymore. Okay, you just need to be very careful that if you notice anything in your property which could cause damage or injury to anyone, then you're going to have to deal with it. Okay, so recently there's been a couple of changes to Residential Tenancies Act, one being smoke alarms. As of next week, being the 1st of July, every rental property in New Zealand will have to have a smoke alarm within 3 metres of every bedroom door. This is the bare minimum. And also a smoke alarm on each level of the property. If it's installed after the 1st of July, you're going to have to require to have a 10-year alarms. I think they're called photoelectric alarms. If you've got old style alarms in the property, that's fine. You can keep them there as long as they're in the correct place. Okay? But if you put it in after the 1st of July, you can no longer put the cheaper ones in with 9-volt batteries into the properties. If you have the older style, the tenants are liable for replacing the batteries. But you are liable for making sure that alarm is in working order. Again, going back to Australia, in Australia, because of the health and safety laws, something which is going to happen to New Zealand, is that there's companies out there which specialise in going around rental properties now, checking smoke alarms. Because how do you make sure your smoke alarm's working properly? Especially if the ceilings are high, they get dusty, they get damaged. It's now your responsibility under health and safety to make sure that that is actually in working order. The next big change is July 2019. Underfloor and ceiling insulation is going to be required in all rental properties. If you have a modern property, this isn't an issue. Okay? But if you've got an old sort of 1950s weatherboard house, then you need to be checking whether your property has insulation in it. I would encourage people here today to go away and check that out, and if you don't, get it in quickly. 2 reasons for that. Number one, the closer we get to July 2019, I can guarantee the price of installation and the ability to get it done quickly is going to get higher and more difficult. Number 2, from July this year, all tenancy agreements are going to require a clause stating the level of insulation in the property. And if you're putting on your tenancy agreement there's no insulation, I can guarantee you the type of tenants you're going to start getting aren't going to be the ones which are going to be paying the higher rents, and they're not the ones who are going to be looking after the properties. They're going to be the ones who can't get into the nicely insulated properties. Insurance. Now today, when we originally were talking to Janet back in February about giving this presentation, I was going to talk to you about insurance in the sense that landlord insurance, if your tenant absconds, what to do as far as what sort of insurance policy you need. However, in April, all of that changed. In April, there was a court case called Hollow Rosie versus Osaki and Anor. If you don't know this case, which I imagine a lot of people don't, Osaki and Anor are a Japanese couple who lived in Wellington. They had a pot of oil on the stove. They left the pot of oil unattended, walked out of the room, came back, well, didn't come back, but the whole place burnt down basically. So, as has been the case in the past, the insurance company picked up the cost of the rebuild for the owners, and then they went for the tenants for the cost of that rebuild. The tenants didn't have any insurance, so they took it to court. What happened at court was it was decided that under property law that the insurance is paid by the owner pays for it by using the rental income. So essentially the courts are saying the tenant is paying for the insurance. So now your insurance is actually being paid for by the tenant. What does that mean for you? It means you must use your insurance if the tenant causes damage in the property. You can't make the tenant pay for it. So the best example would be a hand basin. Okay, often we have cabinets above our hand basins. Someone drops a perfume bottle, cracks the basin, $800 new basin. your insurance policy is excess is $1,000, you're up $800. You can't charge that tenant for that $800. If the tenant intentionally causes damage to the property, the only way we've been informed by tribunal in the last few months is that we have to go to the police station and lodge a police report and then take that to tribunal. Then they will look at it to charge the tenant for the cost of the repairs. Otherwise, whether they've done it on purpose or not, you have to use your insurance policy. And you're unable to claim the excess back from the tenant. The logic behind this has been that because you get to choose what insurance policy you go for, what your premium is. Obviously, if you want a lower premium, you're going to have a higher excess. The tenant doesn't get to choose that. So if your premium's low and you've got a $1,000 excess, then and something goes wrong and it's under $1,000, you're up for the whole cost. So, what's the solution to this? There is only one, really. That is, make sure you get comprehensive insurance. Okay? Make sure your insurance covers everything. Pay that little bit extra for your premium. The other thing is, make sure you review your rents, going back to the start, every 6 months. Owners at the moment are up for checking for P-labs, insurance, insulation, fire alarms. Now, I'm not trying to talk you away from buying investment properties by any means, but I'm just saying this is a business for you. And as a business, you need to make sure that your income is set and that you are getting the maximum out of your business. And the best way to do that is making sure that you are at all times charging the market rent. Thank you very much.